Hello everyone, my name is Do from the APEC office, and in this video, I'll be covering about the overview about Malaysia e-invoicing and also the new module that has been released which supports the integration between Odoo and the MyInvoice platform. So therefore, to start with the introduction, this is the module that supports the integration between the MyInvoice and the Odoo. So what this does is that it supports the handling of the invoices into a format that can properly handle the e-invoices, which will allow maybe submission of the e-invoice to the MyInvoice platform directly via a simple button, maybe request for cancellation, but while you're still able to use Odoo in a standard way. So for those who might be a bit confused or not yet familiar with e-invoice, what I can let you know is that you can consider it as a new maybe paradigm or generation about the invoicing. So what we can think already is that in the past, we used to generate invoices in a paper format, and then we evolved towards the electronic paper format, which can be in PDF. Now we are moving on to the new generation, which is electronic data in a new format called XML or JSON, so that all these transaction-related data are stored in a specific electronic format for easier transmission. And then now, without even having a need to maybe exchange the papers or PDF files, the recipient can easily receive all the transaction-related data, whether it may be the government or the business that you're sending it to. So therefore, under Malaysia's new regulation, we are now moving into the new paradigm of having to issue e-invoice instead of having to generate other different formats of invoices. And this new module is, of course, designed in order to abide by the regulation, and then this has been available since December 2024, and then it is supported from all the versions from 17.0 and onwards. So there might be slightly, I think it will benefit you in case if I am able to provide more explanation about some of the terminologies that I used before. So I can start with MyInvoice first. So MyInvoice is the platform supported by LHDNM. So LHDNM, also known as the Inland Revenue Department, they are the tax collector on behalf of the government, and they provide all the services such as administration or assessment or different types of operation regarding the collection of taxes. And then in order to make it easier for the taxpayers to maybe report the taxes and then maybe pay for the taxes, and also for them to know how much tax they have to pay, they support one-stop platform, a centralized platform called MyTax. And in this platform, they also, of course, further divide into different types of services, or the platforms basically can support different types of services. And then one of them you can consider as MyInvoice, and in this platform is designed for the purpose of maybe submitting the e-invoice to the authority so that all the transaction-related data can be received by the government, and then it is easier for the tracking purpose of the taxes. So, in order for the governments to be able to implement the e-invoices in terms of the taxpayers, they normally proceed in terms of the timeline. Of course, it will be difficult to implement all this e-invoice in a one go when the infrastructure is not ready or none of the softwares are ready. So therefore, they normally start with the big taxpayers and then gradually proceed towards providing it towards the smaller taxpayers and also ultimately to all the taxpayers. And then recently in February, they also updated this timeline into 4 different phases, which was 3 in the past. And right now, we are currently in the second phase, where all the taxpayers with an annual turnover or revenue between 25 million Malaysian ringgit to 100 million Malaysian ringgit are required to submit all the invoices for all the goods and services related transactions that they make. And as soon, the next phase will be moving on to 1st of July, we'll be covering the taxpayers of turnover or revenue between 500,000 to 25 million Malaysian ringgit. So, to abide by this timeline, of course, the government also does not expect you to always have the software or any other, or develop your own software in order to abide by this. Therefore, of course, they support this platform first called MyInvoice. And then using this MyInvoice portal, you can, of course, create an invoice there and then maybe directly submit it to the government on the portal. But the only problem, or another thing to consider, is that if you generate an invoice maybe outside of the MyInvoice platform and then maybe send it to your buyer, you still have to fill in the same information again in the MyInvoice platform, which will actually make it double the work that you have to do. So that's why Odoo goes for the second method, which is an integration via API. So using this method, instead of having to create the invoice in Odoo first and then you have to create the same information in the platform, what you can simply do is issue the invoice like how you do in the general standard way of doing it in Odoo, and then you just need to click send to MyInvoice, and then all the information in that invoice will already be stored in the MyInvoice platform and then submitted to the government, and then it will be used for your tracking purpose of the taxes related to sales and services. So that was the basic overview of what I wanted to provide about MyInvoice, and then now I'll be moving towards the steps that you have to proceed with in order to be able to file the e-invoices, and also the configuration that you need to do inside of Odoo so that you can actually use this module so that with only a few clicks you can send the e-invoice to the MyInvoice platform. Now, we first start with some of the steps that you need to do outside of Odoo first, and then we'll move on to the steps that you need to do inside of Odoo. So, the first and the foremost requirement that you need to ensure is that you have the TIN number issued, and then using that TIN number, you should be able to log into MyTax portal. As I mentioned, MyTax is a centralized platform, so don't worry if you do not have a TIN number issued yet, because using MyTax portal as well, you're able to issue the TIN number using the menu in the main page. So if I show you here, this is the MyTax page, and then one of the biggest menu that you can see is e-daftar. This is the menu that you can click into issue a TIN number, which once you fill in the identification document type and number, you will be able to issue a TIN number that you can log into MyTax. And normally it takes less than a week, and then once it is issued, you will receive a TIN number with the notification saying that now you have this TIN number and you are able to log into MyTax platform. So using the same information, you can log in, but you don't log in with your TIN number directly, but instead you log in with your identification information number and the password that you set. So first of all, for me, I use my passport to issue the TIN number, and then I fill in the password. So once you're logged in, this is it. So this is the first preparation that you need to do. You need to be able to log into MyTax. And once you log in, as you can see, there is MyInvoice menu at the top. Like I mentioned, MyTax is a centralized platform. So therefore, all these types of services that you need to do in order to manage your taxes can be done here, MyInvoice being one of them. So immediately, you can simply click into MyInvoice menu, and then once it is loaded, you will be able to access the main page already. And the thing is that on my side, I was able to directly access MyInvoice immediately. However, if it is your first time that you're clicking into MyInvoice menu, there will be some terms and agreements that you will have to make and some additional information that you will have to fill in. Only once that is done, it takes less than about 5 minutes, you will be able to access MyInvoice. And then, next one is make sure to understand whether you're actually going into the production or pre-production MyInvoice. So the method I did just now was to log into the production immediately, which is for the actual reporting of the e-invoices. However, MyInvoice actually supports pre-production and production environment, where you can use pre-production for testing first, and then when you're confident and when you see it's working, you can use production environment. So how you can do that is simply go on to Google and type my invoice, maybe pre-production. And then for the pre-production, you can see the first search result, which shows my invoice, and the URL also shows preprod.myinvoice. So if you log in through the route here, you're technically accessing pre-production environment. I was only able to log in immediately to the pre-production environment, but you will go through the same method where you click into it. If it's your first time, you still have to agree to the terms and conditions and then add some additional information. So this is complete. And then last and the most crucial step that you'll need to now go through is to add Odoo as an intermediary. So you basically have to give Odoo as us an access to be able to send e-invoice on your behalf. And how you can do that is you can go into the MyInvoice portal. And then one of the menu that you will see in the main menu will be My Taxpayer Profile. Another way is also you can click into the right-hand top side. And once you click into your profile, you'll also be able to see the menu called My Taxpayer Profile. And once you're in that menu, scroll to the bottom, you will see this representative section. So this section is where you manage all the intermediaries that you're adding so that they can actually send e-invoice on your behalf. And you need to add Odoo as an intermediary here, and then you can see the button here on the right hand side which says Add Intermediary. So once you click into it, you need to fill in the TIN number, BRN, and the name of the intermediary, which is Odoo. So the TIN number, BRN, name, all this information is included in our official documentation. So you can simply Google search and type Odoo Malaysia documentation. And then once you click into the first link that you see and scroll to the bottom, as you scroll here, you'll be able to see the same information that is displayed here. But what you need to make sure is that the difference between the production and pre-production environment only is the name to add us as an intermediary. So if it's a TIN number and the BRN, there's no difference between the production environment and the pre-production environment. But only in case of name, MyInvoice needs to differentiate the name. So therefore, for the pre-production, you will see multiple axes in the name. So make sure to remember that, and as long as you're aware of that, you're ready to go. Fill in the information and the CAPTCHA information and click the search icon. The rest of the information should be populated automatically, and you just need to simply click Continue. And this is all the steps that you need to do outside of Odoo. And now we move on to the steps inside of Odoo so that you can get it started. So starting off with now the configuration inside of Odoo. So configuration inside Odoo is pretty straightforward and simple. The most important step will be, of course, to install the related modules that are a must, and then also fill in the related mandatory information that my platform requires you to fill in when you're trying to send out the e-invoice. So that's most of the things, and then I will be straight away going into how to install which of the apps first. So when you go into the database first, and you'll be able to see the apps app here. So when you click into it, normally Odoo has the default filter on that actually displays all the modules available to install in terms of the app. But however, because Malaysia e-invoicing is more about the module itself, you just first need to remove the filter that we have and then type Malaysia. So when you type Malaysia, you'll be able to see Malaysia e-invoicing, and for certain versions that you're using, you'll also be able to see e-invoicing extended features. But don't worry, when you install the Malaysia e-invoicing, the extended features module will also be installed automatically, and we also plan on merging this in the future version. So make sure that right now my database already has this installed. So therefore, in your database, make sure you also see it same way as I do and install the e-invoicing, and this should also be installed at the same time. So that's the first step that you need to do. And after you're done installing, then you have to fill in the required information that you can see here on the screen. So these are the information that MyInvoice mandates you to fill in order to issue the e-invoice, whether you're a buyer or seller. And then, so there's tax ID, TIN number, address, identification method, and all these. I'll jump into the database to show you where to fill in this information and what some of these information present more in depth. So when you go into the settings, and when you click update info, this is the place where you can update the information about your company's profile. So in this profile, you're able to change all the addresses, TIN numbers, and everything. So make sure you fill in the phone number, all the addresses that you need to fill in about your company, and the TIN number that you are registered under MyTax. And then another thing that you will also be able to see when you install the module that I mentioned just now is that another section called e-invoicing. And inside this section called e-invoicing, you have to fill in the identification method that you use to issue the TIN number in the first place. So at the top here, we have the TIN number, tax ID here, and this is my tax ID. And in order for me to issue this tax ID, I used passport here. Depending on your option you chose, you can input MyCAD or business registration number or passport or army code as well, and fill in, make sure to choose the right type and fill in the information here. And then another information that you must fill in is the industry classification code as per the business industry or the types of goods that you're engaged with. So this is the information that you have to fill in first in terms of your company profile. So next thing comes up is, now that you have filled in the TIN number, you can actually enable the e-invoicing in the accounting app's settings. So how you can do this is that go into the accounting app and under configurations settings. As you scroll down, you will be able to find here, Malaysian electronic invoicing. So mine is already registered, so I will unregister to disable it, but this is what you should be seeing. So we have pre-production and production environment, which are both supported, so you can decide which one to go for first, whether you want to connect with MyInvois pre-production platform or whether you want to connect with production platform. And then, because you filled in the tax identification number in the company settings, you should be able to see the TIN number that you'll be using to send e-invoices. And then without having that information filled, you will not be able to activate this. So once you make sure to check that this is the right TIN number you're sending the e-invoice under, just tick the checkbox to indicate I accept that Odoo will be processing it. And then you need to click register. So once registered, you can see this green sentence saying that the electronic invoicing service is in use, and that means you're ready to use. But however, there still is some additional information you still need to fill in, which is mandatory. So next one coming up is the Malaysian classification code for the product. So this information is a must for you to fill in in order for the government to understand what is the product that you're actually using to issue the invoice under. So technically, you can actually set this directly on the invoice, but to make it more simplified and easier for you to use, you can go into the product menu in the inventory app or sales app or purchase app or the accounting app. And then when you click into the product, I'll click test as an example, make sure that you fill in the value for the Malaysian classification code. So this is the field that needs to be filled in, and depending on the classification code of the product, just make sure to fill in the right one, and this is the classification code that will be applied on default to the invoice when you generate an e-invoice. So for my case, I'll just click others here as an example. And then since I am here, I will just add some additional information such as the sales price, but all the other details are something optional and you can follow as per what you use in Odoo standard. But what is a must is Malaysian classification code. And then the next thing that comes up is that in terms of all the taxes that you will be using to file the e-invoice under, you also need to choose Malaysian tax type. So this one if you're using the text already set by Odoo, then you don't need to set this again. Odoo will already have this field set. However, so for instance, this is the Odoo default text, such as 5% and the sales tax. However, if you decide to create a new tax, let's say maybe 8%, you just need to make sure that you choose the right type of tax that you're actually sending the e-invoice under, which will be used for your tax filing purposes. So therefore, make sure that this is set in the tax settings, and then you're almost now ready to proceed with the e-invoicing. One more thing that you need to fill in is the information about the contact which you're sending the e-invoice to, or whether you're issuing a self-issued invoice under. So therefore, the information you need to fill in is pretty much similar to the company information that you need to fill in. But this is something you have to be aware. Every time you create a new contact, in order for you to be able to issue an invoice to them, you need to fill in the same information. So, for example, let's say I have this test customer that I want to send an e-invoice to. Under this contact, I fill in the similar information, all the information about the addresses, and then I input the same mobile number, just 1, 2, 3, 4 as an example. And then one thing you will find very only slightly different is the TIN number, because tax ID is not filled in here. This is for the purpose of handling a transaction in case of the foreign companies, because they might have a separate TIN number that is locally used and also the one that is used for the MyInvoice as well. So therefore, this is something optional, and this will not be used if there is a TIN number already filled in the sales and purchase tab here and under the My Invoice information section. So if there is, so Odoo will first try to prioritize the TIN number set in the My Invoice information section. So if the TIN number is not filled in here, then it will use the text ID displayed at the top here. So just mentioning once again, this is for the purpose of the foreign companies in case they use different TIN number for their local market, but they also have another TIN number issued for the purpose of MyInvoice. So therefore, you can fill in the same information like I did, whether it is the identification type of that TIN number of this contact, and then fill in the industry classification. I'll put it as maybe growing of OCs as an example, and then the TIN number. So if you also want to validate if this is the actual valid credentials to send, you can click this validate button here. And then using the API, Odoo will already be able to validate if this is the right TIN number that is valid and available for send. And one thing I just want to slightly mention here is that in case you're billing it to the general public and you're using a general TIN number that is provided by the MyInvoice portal, you may not see it as valid, but you will still be able to send the e-invoices. The example I'm mentioning is the one such as EI00000010, like the ones that are used for maybe non-specific parties, such as it could be a foreign vendor or the general public. So these are the information that I filled in. So I made sure to fill in all the MyInvoice related information, all the addresses, and the phone number. Now you're ready to actually send out the e-invoices to the MyInvoice platform. Now that we are done with the configuration, we can start sending the invoices already. So I'll be showing you how we can send out the invoices with the configuration that we have done just now. So the steps are pretty much simple. There's nothing special or additional step that you have to do in order to send the e-invoice if you follow the steps that I mentioned just now. So in the accounting app, so you go into customers and invoices, you can issue the invoice in a same way that you would do under the Odoo standard setting. So you choose the right customer and the product. The only thing that you have to be aware is that choose the customer that you already filled in their TIN number and the identification documents and the information, because otherwise it will not be considered valid for sending. And then for the product, because there already was a classification code that I put as a default value on the product, that's why Odoo already filled it out for me. But in case this is not filled, you can still choose to fill this manually and it's something optional. But in my personal recommendation would be, since each product normally only falls under a particular category, I would recommend that you set it out on the product level. And another thing that you might notice is that this Malaysian classification code field might not be visible on your screen or on your database. And this is something that's optional for you to see it or not, depending on whether you want or not. So, assuming that these all information have been filled, I didn't touch anything else, confirm, and you will be able to see this send to my invoice button here. So this is the first step that you need to go through. But first and the only step, send to my invoice. Once clicked on the right hand bottom, you can see loading. This means Odoo is already sending, and it is my invoice platform is trying to validate the invoice for us already. And right now, as you can see, my invoice platform has not given us the validation feedback yet. So therefore, the status becomes from none to validation in progress, but we still received all the information needed about the e-invoice for the submission, and then all those details are also filled in the My Invoice tab here, such as My Invoice state, validation in progress, submission UID, invoice ID, long ID here. But normally it doesn't take that much time for us to receive the validation feedback from the MyInvoice platform. So after a while, now that it's been a while since we sent, you can actually update the status by clicking Update My Invoice Status button here. So once you click this, as you can see, In Progress button ribbon is gone now because this is a valid invoice. And then the status became Validation in Progress to Valid. Also in the My Invoice status, you can see all the information that is involved, and this is easy to track for your side. And since we sent the invoice, one thing I can also slightly mention is that only for those validated invoices, My Invoice mandates that when you're sharing the visual representation of the e-invoices, the QR code must be embedded in the PDF file or the file that you're sharing, or maybe even on the paper format that you're sharing. So in order to accommodate that, once it is valid, I can just click Send and Print, or I can even click Download. So both the PDF and the XML file will be attached. I can save it. But what I want to show you here is that on the PDF file that you can see here, there is a QR code displayed here. And once this is scanned, it will directly forward the scanner to the My Invoice platform, showing the information about this e-invoice exactly, showing basically the status, who is it issued to, and all the product and the amount issued underneath it. But what happens if I want to now cancel an invoice? If I want to request for the cancellation, I can simply click Request Cancellation button here. But make sure to be aware that My Invoice platform only allows cancellation of the invoice only under 72 hours of issuance. So therefore, if it's above that, you'll have to issue a credit note. But if it's within the 72 hours, you can indicate the reason and update invoice and canceled. So I can already show you on the My Invoice platform as well. When you go into the My Invoice platform, you can click Documents, and Documents will already be showing you all the invoices that you sent and their status and the information inside of it. So invoice 00100 that you can see here, I can help zoom in. 100. This is already submitted here, and I can already click in to see all the information inside that I have submitted. Because I requested for cancellation, you can see the canceled status here. But originally, before I requested for cancel, it will show valid. And then, of course, the supplier, which because I am the supplier issuing from, so all the company details that I input will be displayed here. And the test customer who I'm issuing the e-invoice to will be, that person's detail will be included here. And of course, not to mention the product classification codes, the total amounts, and the tax amounts included inside of it. So now that I've already issued a single invoice, what happens if I want to issue multiple invoices and send multiple of them to the My Invoice platform at the same time? So that is also easily possible. So for my side, I will create a duplicate of the original invoices to quickly make multiple invoices. So the numbers are 104 and 100, oh, not this one. I can go back. So 104 and 103. So these two are the new invoices that I created just now. And then on the list view of all the invoices, I can simply click the checkbox to choose the ones that I want to send. And then under actions, you can click send to my invoice. And then once you click, on the right hand bottom, you can see the loading. And once it's gone, and it means the submission has been completed. So I start looking from 103. It has already been sent. Status is valid already. And then 104, it is also valid already. So these two documents will share the same submission code. So what differentiates the invoice ID, long ID, and submission ID is that submission ID is assigned one per submission that you make. We submitted 2 invoices using one submission. That's why there will be one submission with 2 different documents underneath it. So that's why when I submitted 2 documents as well, on the platform itself, when I refresh, I am able to see invoice 103, 104, and they are 2 different documents. But if I go to submission, they fall under one submission here, which contains these 2 invoices here. But all the information stays the same, and then it is just for you to be able to submit multiple invoices at the same time and to be able to keep track of what all invoices were submitted at a single time. So that's the case. And now I can actually move towards the issuance of a credit note. So what about the cases where I already submitted the invoice and it has been validated properly, but it has already been more than 72 hours since the issuance and I now have to make an adjustment on the invoice? Under those cases, I can simply issue a credit note inside of Odoo and submit it to the MyInvoice as well. So how I can do that is, you can see the credit note button here. But please be aware that the original invoice that you're submitting must already be validated on the MyInvoice platform. Otherwise, the credit note will not know which is the invoice that we're issuing the credit note under. So therefore, I'm only using the invoice that I already have submitted, and I'll use a credit note here. Make an adjustment like this, reverse. So same method as issuance of a general credit note, confirm, and then you will also be able to see send to my invoice button here. So once you click send to my invoice, Odoo will already be able to know what is the type of document that you're issuing right now, and then generate an electronic credit note. So status is valid now. Let's go check again on the platform. I'll go to documents, refresh again. I didn't have to refresh, but reverse invoice 00050. 00050. As you can see, the credit note has been issued, and then it is already detected that this is the credit note that we are issuing under. And once you go in, of course, all the details stay the same and you can keep track of it. So that was the credit note issuance, and now I can move on to the issuance of how about self-billed invoices. So for the self-billed invoices, we have to typically issue them under maybe a transaction with a foreign vendor. I purchased something from the foreign vendor and now I have to report it to the MyInvoice portal, but they do not have access to the MyInvoice portal because they don't have a TIN number, or they might not need to issue an e-invoice. Under such cases and the others specified by the MyInvoice guideline, there will be a scenario where you have to issue the invoice on behalf of your supplier. That's what we call self-billed invoices, and that is also supported in Odoo as well. I will go to vendors menu, and under the bills, I'll issue a bill under the name of the vendor that I'm purchasing the product from. So instead of test customer, so that I can use the same credential, I'll just change the name to vendor. And then I'll choose the product, test. And then only something I also want to add here is that if you decide to use a tax exemption tax, you have to make sure to fill in the tax exemption reason. Otherwise, there will be a validation error showing that you're not allowed to send. So for now, I'll just proceed and I will not input the text reason first. Bill date. So how I created this bill is same as how I created an invoice. Confirm. And now if I try to send it, there will be an error, of course, because as I mentioned, if you're using tax exemption tax, you have to use input tax exemption reason in order to be able to send this e-invoice. But the steps are simple. This product is exempted from SST under regulation X. Now I click send to my invoice once again. As you can see, loading is being done, and then once it's done, validation in progress to valid. So the status of the vendor bill has become valid and submission is completed, and you can actually go onto the portal. As you can see, bill 2025030002. 2025030002. Same information, all the information are valid here, and then the type becomes self-billed invoice. And using the same method, you can also request for the cancellation and also issue a credit note on the top of the self-billed invoices, but make sure to remember all the conditions that I mentioned just now. If you were to deal with the tax exemption tax, fill in the tax exemption reason. For the cancellation, you have to make sure that you request for the cancellation within the 72 hours only. But this also applies to the backdate invoices as well. If you have already issued an invoice 72 hours ago, more than 72 hours ago, and now you want to submit it to MyInvois, it will be prevented from the submission as well. So both the request for cancellation and submission of the e-invoice that is more than 72 hours is not allowed. Make sure to keep that in mind. And for the issuance of the credit note, if you cannot request for the cancellation, issue the credit note, and you can do the same thing, same process. But the only thing make sure to be in mind is that original invoice has to be submitted and exist in the MyInvois platform. Otherwise, MyInvois platform will not be able to know where, which invoice are we issuing this credit note under. So these are the parts that I want you to have in mind. But apart from that, these were the major aspects that I wanted to show you today. As a last section of today's video, so I'll go through some of the frequently asked questions that I received from the customers and the partners, and also some of the questions I had myself when I was working on this feature. To start off with, is there any additional cost to use the e-invoicing feature? There is no any additional cost in order to use this feature, and this is covered under the standard agreement of Odoo and a standard plan of Odoo, and therefore it is free to use. And also the MyInvois platform itself is free of service for usage. So to summarize, there's no any additional cost on your side in order to use this feature to submit e-invoices. And then next question will be, do I only need Odoo database to use this feature? If you watch this video today, you will be able to know that you have to have Odoo database, and you also need to have the credentials and account on the MyTax platform to be able to establish the connection. So therefore, I wouldn't say that you only need Odoo database, but you also need to make sure that you have all the credentials you need to log into MyTax and MyInvois platform as well. Does Odoo support both the MyInvois pre-production and production? Yes. Whether Odoo's database is trial database or the database under subscription, you can actually connect with all environment of MyInvois. So you can connect with pre-production or production. You just need to make sure that you grant Odoo access as an intermediary, like I mentioned, and you establish the connection properly based on the configuration that I mentioned today. Then you will be able to use Odoo with any of the environment, and any databases can do so. And then the last question is, can existing databases use the following feature? Existing databases, new databases, any databases can use this following feature as long as they are on 17.0 or on above version. So if you're using any maybe 16.0 version or 15.0, my recommendation would be to upgrade the database to 17.0 or 18.0 so that you can enjoy the latest features, and you can also use this feature to abide by the e-invoicing regulation under Malaysia. So those were the frequently asked questions that I wanted to cover today, and then this will be all for the video. Thank you for watching, and then hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.